Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first podcast of the Step Up Youth community. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our first episode today. My name is Ashley Price. I'm an ambassador for the STU movement. And as you already know, what we aim to do as a charity and a community is to provide you with the platforms and the programs to engage and equip you with the right tools to excel. And saying that today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dilys Sillah, who is a transformational life coach and specializes in emotional independence and relationship coaching. Dilys is going to share with us a wonderful journey today around her book called Not This Widow. And it's a journey of grief, love, loss, strength and survival. Dilys started her writing journey as an advocate for abused women and children. Her profession as a coach gave her insight into the challenges that came with recovering from trauma, failed and unhealthy relationships, and how people bounce back from those experiences. So Dilys, is absolutely a pleasure to welcome you to our first podcast, and thank you for joining us. And what I'd love to do is start with you, if you can, just explain a little bit about who you are and why you indeed came to write the second book in your series and the journey that you've been on so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very honoured to be the first, which is nice. Hopefully not the last. And not the last time that I'll be joining you. So thank you very much for that. My journey, as you mentioned, I work as a transformational life coach, specializing in relationship coaching and emotional independence, which a lot of people don't know what that is, but that's just basically teaching people how they're able to make decisions about their lives, whether it's family, relationship, career, from a place of consciousness. And in other words, not from past trauma or past bad relationships, but they're able to make decisions that are very sound. You go through a very clear thought process that's unemotional, that is practical, and decisions that you can take ownership for. So, for example, you're in a relationship, it ends badly, or you've been in a number of relationships that have ended badly. It's like, I'm never going to let a man hurt me again. Well, that's great. But what's your reason and the mindset and the intention and emotion behind that statement? Because you can come to that conclusion by saying, I'm not going to let another man hurt you again, because you know who you are and you've grown into the woman that you've become, addressing past failed relationships and the experiences from that, and even going back to maybe how you were brought up that may have contributed to why you have allowed yourself, in quote, not to be treated well in relationships, as opposed to going, I'm really angry and I am going to be the one that inflicts the pain as opposed to be the one that's afflicted. So that's very much an area that interests me a lot, because I feel that we women are a lot cleverer than we're given credit for, but we just don't have the information in order to be able to make smart decisions. So that was an area of coaching that I felt that was really needed for us, especially as women. I also now do a lot of grief coaching, and I'm now an advocate for widows, mainly because I myself was widowed 2 years ago. And the experiences that I was subjected to, even being in England, you'd think that I wouldn't be subjected or be connected to certain cultural practices, but that wasn't the case for me. And the reason why I wrote the book was because I felt that I was disappointed, I was a bit angry, that what I was going through was not unique, it wasn't special. And yet still I wasn't hearing or had never heard of any other women that had gone through that kind of emotional abuse at a time where you are the most vulnerable that you're probably ever going to be, i.e. when you suddenly lose a spouse. So I wrote the book as part memoir, just to, take people through my journey, but also how we are able to deal with grief authentically and deal with grief in a way that is supportive and is kind, because it was certainly not something that I was, had experienced when I lost my husband. So that was the reason behind the book.
And in the book, Dilys, you talk quite candidly about the cultural differences, and it's something we're not great at talking about, I think, as a society, is how we handle our grief in general. And I know there's some fascinating points that you talk about in terms of cultural background, in terms of, if you want to explain this a little bit further, but I found deeply moving that, you know, you've just gone through the shock of losing your loved one, which no one can ever prepare you for anyway, no matter what time of life you're at. But actually in comes the family around you accusing you of misdemeanors, things that, you know, yeah, and I mean, it'd be great if you could share some of that experience, because for me, I found that personally very powerful, something I was not aware of that culturally you went through. Yeah.
Yeah. As I said, it was shocking because I was in England. So originally I'm from Ghana. My late husband was from Sierra Leone. So there were some cultural differences there. But what I realized, I think it was 48 hours after my husband passed away suddenly, that the family was saying I wasn't picking up the phone. Who picks up the phone immediately after they lose a loved one? And you know, you've got children to deal with. You go to the hospital and you come back without your husband. I was not in a position to hold any coherent conversations with anybody. But that very quickly degenerated into me being disrespectful towards the family, not wanting to involve them. And then that progressed onto me being responsible for killing my husband. Because unbeknown to me, you know, as I always say when I do these interviews, that, you know, an African man never dies. If he's married, then his wife must have killed him. You know, forget the fact that my husband had been unwell for, you know, over 3 years. And I was solely responsible for tending to him without any help or input from anyone. You know, the family didn't think to rise up and make their voices heard at a time where one could have done with some support. You know, we were doing pretty well on our own, but to choose the opportunity of when my late husband had died, to then jump on me to say, yes, you're the one responsible for killing him, was it very difficult. But I quickly snapped out of any form of woe is me. I went into fight mode and I gave as good as I got. I decided that I am not going to be a victim. I felt victimized enough by being thrust into widowhood with no warning. Yeah. One day I was a wife, the next minute I was a widow. And I just felt that I wasn't going to allow myself to be dragged into different, you know, scenarios of abuse just because that was the norm. So I challenged that. And, you know, it was interesting because I was doing things that was unheard of. So for example, I had security at my husband's funeral. And, you know, I gave the security guys pictures of people that I did not want there. And I didn't just jump from 0 to 100. I had said, look, you didn't treat my husband very well. In fact, you treated him abysmally. So to then be the main perpetrators of the harassment and the wickedness, I wasn't going to stand for that. I gave them the opportunity to apologize and come good. And I said, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of your memory with your brother. And so therefore, this is the olive branch that I am offering you after everything. It wasn't good enough. They were like, no, not interested. We're going to show up. I'm like, the hell you will. And that was that, you know. A couple of people got a tap on the shoulder and they were duly escorted, you know, out of the funeral. But I had to do those things because I couldn't afford, for my personal grief journey, to look back and have any regrets that I wish the person wasn't there, because I know my late husband wouldn't have wanted them there. So it was also honoring what I knew Eddie wanted, as well as not wanting to be a fraud, because the way my late husband knew me, the woman that he knew, wasn't a coward. She fought for people. She spoke up for people. You know, she would lay her life down for somebody. How then does she allow herself to be the very person that she would be protecting? So for the sake of not letting myself down, I had an added reason for needing to rise up and make my own voice be heard for myself.
Where did you pick that strength up, Dilys, like to get out of bed in the morning? Because, you know, that it's a, you know, as I say, no one prepares you for any of that. And how, you know, I know I've spoken to a lot of people myself, and that thing of getting the strength to even get out of bed in the morning, you know, is it something that's just naturally inside you? Is it something you had to really dig deep for to get motivated for the next day ahead, you know, because it's a lot to deal with and you're getting all of this extra stuff thrown at you in an already traumatic time. So, you know, is it something that's naturally inside your character, or did you really feel that you had to sort of dig a bit deeper to keep that focus and move that forward?
I think it's a bit of both. And I always say to people, when you are bereaved and it hits you like it hit me, it is not strength that gets you through, it's grace. Mm. It's so not strength. You have no strength. And it's some of the things that we say to people when they're grieving, like, you know, be strong. I'm like, for who?
Yeah.
Who am I being strong for? I was a wreck. So I fought when I needed to fight, but when the fight was over, I would be that broken person.
Yeah.
Because I was put into a situation that I never thought I would ever be put in. I couldn't see what my future would be like. I remember on the Saturday, because what happens is traditionally when somebody passes away in my culture, on the seventh day, we have like a sit down thing where, you know, people will come in, they will greet, and they'll bring either a monetary donation, or they'll bring, you know, drinks, so that the mourners will have something to drink whilst they're there. No cooking is done in the house of a widowed person. So I remember on the Saturday, my sisters had arranged for me to have a black kaftan. That was when reality hit for me. And that was when I just wailed, because I thought, so it's real. Mm. And what I found really difficult, the shame I felt. I can't describe why I felt so ashamed that I'd lost my husband. And I can only think of the fact that I felt so exposed. Now, when you know, as a Christian, your husband is your covering. I felt my covering was gone. I felt so naked and so exposed. Like anybody that wanted to take a shot at me, there was no shield and there was no barrier. So those are the things that I was having to deal with emotionally and mentally, that it's difficult to describe in words, because it's such a powerful emotion. How one can convey that in words is nigh impossible, I think.
Yeah.
But I feel that the strength element was because there were so many people praying for me, and that those that were with me were more than those that were against me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So where I had strength and I didn't have the strength. Yeah. Feel in my spirit that there were people that were praying for me fervently. Mm. And I am under no illusion that that's what has gotten me to be the woman that I am 2 years on. And I'm functioning pretty well. I think now I'm back to normal, you know, but it was grace. It was just the sheer grace of God that got me back on track, I would say.
And just touching on that point, because I found, again, you know, you touch on in your book and a previous presentation I've seen of yours, is the spiritual element of getting you through that, the grief and the bereavement that you're going through. I mean, myself, I grew up with a teenage mother who chose for us not to have any religion. And she said when we were old enough, if we wanted to, we could choose our own faith. I subsequently have never chosen to follow any faith, just for the nature of the way I've been brought up. So listening to you when you're talking about the, you know, how the people praying and the faith, do you feel that helped ease the process a little bit by having your faith, that you could, you know, count as a Christian, look to God? Because, you know, sometimes for myself, personal journey, I've sat in church as I suppose, you know, a non-believer, listening to funeral services. I'm really confused by them, you know, because been brought up that way. So, you know, for me, I'm very curious to think, you know, does that give you comfort? Was that something that helped you in the process?
I have to be honest, and I think this is sometimes a misconception about being a Christian, that sometimes people think that, you know, every moment of every day you're just going to feel so peaceful and everything's wonderful, and, you know, God, we just praise you. It's not like that. Yeah. Those that are honest, it's not always like that. And I'll tell you something. So let's say I'm a gospel singer. I've been a musician for a number of years. The one thing that I could not stand was music. Music made me feel like my flesh was being ripped off, and I was being doused in kerosene or petrol, and fire was being lit. At me at all. For over a year, I could not pray at all. I could not do it. I didn't go through that phase where I was angry with God. Why did you let this happen to me? And I didn't go through that phase. But I was still under no illusion that there were people that were praying and supporting me. And I wasn't raised as a Christian, in as much that, everybody's a Christian, as in, you put on a form, religion, Christian.
Yeah.
My parents were not practicing Christians. But from the age of about 4, I always felt this presence. And I remember my aunt and uncle used to live with us very briefly. They were Christians. And I remember saying to my aunt, she was talking to me about Jesus, and I remember saying to her, so if I asked Jesus to come into my heart, would he? And she said, yes. And I remember being 4, and I've always had a very sharp memory. I remember things that when I was laying in my cot. I remember that far back. And I remember her saying to me that if I asked Jesus to come into my heart, he would. And I've always had this image of praying hands in my heart. Right. At a young age, I would go on my own. I mean, those were the days that you could kind of wander around a little bit when you were younger. At the age of maybe 7, 8. And I would walk, because I was born in Ilford. I would walk from Coventry Road in Essex all the way to, I think it was, oh gosh, what's that road now? Is it Balfour Road? Or I can't remember now. To the Methodist Church, Cranbrook, that was it, Cranbrook Road, Cranbrook Baptist Church, on my own. And I would go and sit in that service on my own. Summertime, I would go to the summer camp on my own. I wasn't influenced by man. I believe I had a very, very personal encounter from a very young age that there is a God. And asking Jesus to come into my heart is what I independently decided and did. And for all this time, and I'm 50 this year, I've never doubted who God was to me. So even at the time where I lost my husband and I couldn't cry out to God myself, I knew that he cared enough about me for other people to cry out on my behalf. Yeah. As to why, somebody that was so broken, 2 years later, if I don't say to somebody that this is the experience that I've had, they would never look at me and believe it. And that's the power of healing, I believe, that I've had through Christ for my personal journey.
Excellent. And I think this, when anyone experiences any loss, I think everyone kind of goes through that cycle, don't they? They reckon there's 5 points that you go through in terms of the bereavement cycle. I mean, I know you talked about you didn't feel like you went through that process. There was parts of it you did. Yeah, parts of it you didn't. And I think it's fair to say that people expect you to go through those 5 points and then be okay at the end of it. And actually, they're waiting for that end point where you go, yeah, no, I'm fine now, I'm over it. And actually, that can never, that certainly just doesn't feel very true to me. I think, when I lost someone close to me, I remember a friend saying to me that you'll never get over this. She said, you will never, ever get over your loss, but you will learn to live with it differently as each day goes by. And I think that always stuck with me in terms of, do you know what? I think it's okay to not get over it, missing someone. It's okay to not, doesn't matter. You don't have to put a time limit on your grief. And I think, whether it's 2 years, whether it's 15 years, it doesn't matter. If you miss that person, you miss that person, and that's completely valid, no matter what part you're in. And I think, I don't mind if you wouldn't mind it sharing a little bit, Dilys, about the sort of the process you went through in terms of those 5 points, because I think, and off memory, I know one of them is shock, denial, anger, and then you go through to the end phase. But
anger. I mean, for me, I didn't go through the negotiation that, Lord, if you do this to me, I didn't go through that. I didn't go through the denial, because the loss was so starkly shocking for me that I couldn't deny what I'd gone through. I couldn't, it was just so in your face that I didn't have the luxury of denial, if I can call it that. I think for something that happens to everybody, we are really poor at supporting people who are grieving until it hits us. So unhelpful phrases like "it is well," or, you know, "you need to move on." It's another one that just aggravates my soul. Or what's the other one? It's, you know, "aren't you over it?" Or, you know, enough time has passed. The fact of the matter is, there is no time limit on how somebody chooses to grieve. And the other thing that I never really appreciated was the assumptions people make about grief that may not necessarily be applicable to me, but what I've seen with other people where, for example, a friend lost her ex-husband. It is assumed that because he was an ex, that it's not devastating news. Yeah. A friend of mine lost her sister. Some idiot went in her inbox and was like, "Oh, but I thought you weren't getting on." And your point exactly is what? You know, we have such childish, insensitive, and such wicked attitudes and behaviors and narratives around grief and grieving people that it's only when it hits you that you realize, oh, maybe that wasn't so nice after all. You know, and I think we need to just think a little bit more, back off a little bit more. You know, when people don't move on, they move forward. Yeah. Nobody wakes up in the morning and think, "Oh, actually, I'm glad that person's dead. You know, I'm over it now."
Yeah.
You know, even if you're estranged from that person, it's called, you know, I kind of call it like those people that aren't legitimately allowed to grieve because they don't hold the title to grieve, which is wrong. Mm. People have the right to grieve whoever they wish to grieve. I mean, gosh, I grieved Whitney Houston when she died because she's the reason why I ever started singing. I have that right to do that. An external person doesn't have the right to say, because you don't hold this title, or because that was your ex-boyfriend, or your ex-girlfriend, or your ex-husband, wife, or you and your mum weren't talking for 20 years. Well, how about regret? Mm. Yeah. You know, people have to struggle with regret as well as grief. And that has to be one of the most hardest forms of grief to have to go through.
Yeah, so I wish I'd done that. I wish we'd had this conversation. I wish we'd done this, you know, yeah, it plays out. Yeah.
I had to talk to my daughter and my son about it because she had gone to school that morning and didn't say bye to her dad, you know, and it's something she struggled with. And my son, he came home and heard my husband and I talking in the living room, and he didn't want to disturb us. So I went out into the hallway and I could see, because I could sense him standing there debating, should I go in, should I go in, should I go? And he didn't. Mm. So I have two children who were living on what if. Yeah. And I had to say to them, and I hope anyone else that's listening that has been bereaved, let me give you a bit of a reality check here. Real life can never be lived, no matter how much you want it to be lived that way, as if today is the last day you're going to speak to that loved one or that person who you've had a tiff with. Real life, real relationships, even with people we love, means we're going to fall out, means you're going to get on our nerves once in a while, or maybe even every day, or there may be times where we've had a tiff and I don't really want you in my space for a couple of days. That's called real life. Yeah. The fact that somebody dies in that space does not define the whole relationship or the years that you have loved that person. Mm. You have to treat it as an incident that just happened to happen at that time. Yeah. And put it in its rightful place, because regret is the enemy of grief, you know, healthy grieving. Mm. You cannot be in that space of, I wish this, I wish that. No, you cannot go there. You've got to be in that space of being honest to say, did I love this person? Yes, I did. If I had the opportunity to do things differently, would I? Yes, I would. It's enough. Yeah. That's sufficient for you to draw a line under it and celebrate all the years, months, and what have you of when you did have the normal everyday interaction that you would have with somebody that means something to you.
Absolutely. And as a mother, I mean, you've gone through the loss of your husband, but as a mother trying to support your children who've just lost their father, I mean, how did you approach that? Did you, obviously I know you said that you're talking to your children, but I can imagine that takes your levels of motherhood to a whole new level, because you always want to protect your children. Of course you do. And, so, I mean, how did that play out with your two children, in terms of the support that you gave them to help them through it?
I think the first thing I had to really put my foot down was my kids went into protective mode. Bearing in mind, my daughter was only 12 when she lost her dad. She cried in front of me, and I said, no. I said, that is not on. I'm the parent here. I've not abdicated that responsibility to either one of you. So that has to stop. But they were like, oh, but that was your husband. And I said, yeah, but that was your dad. Yeah. So let's not pull rank here of who has the right to grieve in this house, because that shouldn't happen. And then I got my son wasn't quite ready for the counselling, but my daughter I forced into counselling. And I say forced because it was like, she didn't want to do it. Now I'm a qualified life coach. And the way in which I coach is quite unique. I pull from different areas in order to get my clients to where I know they need to go. And I knew that she needed counselling. And her response was, I don't want to talk about it. I said, that's why you're having counselling. Yeah. Because you don't want to talk about it. So I went through a process of interviewing counsellors whom I felt would be best suited to my daughter. And I think this is where counselling, doesn't work for many people, because a lot of times it's done on the NHS and you're just paired with somebody and, that's it. You're just lumbered with them. Whether you have a rapport, whether they're the right sex, whether they're the right race sometimes, whether they have the right cultural understanding of where you're coming from, all these things are important. You have to choose your counsellor. The counsellor shouldn't be choosing you. So I chose my daughter. She was absolutely brilliant. And I got a counsellor for myself. So, how I supported the children through it was making sure that we were able to speak and be honest about how we felt in regards to the loss.
And did you find that for both of you, it helped to talk to somebody that has not been involved? A lot of people turn to family and friends in this situation. Did it help to have a sort of outsider just listen and somebody that is not that connected to you? Did you find that helped in the process?
The reasons why I had the counsellor was different, because I'm one of the very fortunate people who, having lost somebody, I wasn't deserted. Many people don't have what I have. They lose someone and their so-called friends just don't come around anymore because they make it all about them. Oh, I can't stand the person crying. And it's not about you. It's really not about you. But that's what a lot of grieving people I found complained about. The fact that they pretend that they're okay in order not to make other people feel uncomfortable. And I cannot think of anything worse. I think that's a horrible, place to be in. That you've got to just, not be selfish and support that grieving person, that they should never feel that they have to wear a mask around you just because you might feel uncomfortable, But I think with me, it was because I was writing the book. I did as much as I could do on my own. I always knew that I would have the counselling. For me personally, the kind of person that I am, looking at my personality, I needed to do as much as I could do for myself. Again, I am trained professionally to know certain things. So I had a little bit of an advantage. I didn't deny any emotion. Whatever I felt, I embraced, I respected, I gave it its space. But when I started writing the book, I didn't appreciate the impact it was going to have on my mental health and physical health. And that's when I thought, no, I need a counsellor because I need to, offload. More so needing an independent person because everybody else was too close. Yeah. And therefore, I had friends that found it difficult to come into the house because you'd come in the living room and, my husband would always be in the living room. So to come in and him not be there was very difficult.
Mm.
A few of my friends and even certain family members. I mean, I refurbed the whole house. You know, first year I had the book, which was released on the anniversary of my husband's passing, the 1 year, so 21st of January. I had that distraction. Then I had a great book launch 24th of January. Then I was going to Morocco the following month. Then I was going to Ghana to launch the book in March. Then I got caught in lockdown for 6 months in Ghana, but that's a whole other story. So I had things to distract me.
Yeah.
This year, we're on lockdown, and I thought, I cannot imagine anything worse than seeing the house exactly as it was. I can't do that. So I literally have changed the whole house. You know, I don't have pictures because for me, that's what I need.
Yeah.
For my own personal healing. And I always say that, you know, grief, how you grieve is as unique as your DNA. No two people grieve the same. So however you grieve that's good for you is wonderful. But you have to allow space for people to grieve how they want to grieve. So for me, though I lost a husband, when I speak into other widows, you will never hear me say, I know how you feel. I don't know how you feel. I'm not you. I wasn't in your marriage. I don't know the impact. I don't know how you lost your husband. You know, I speak to a lady who her husband was murdered, beaten by a mob, and it was national news in Ghana. She didn't even have the luxury of grieving privately, you know. So I can't tell her, I know how you feel. In fact, I can't even say I can imagine because I can't imagine.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I can't. Well, that's, you know. So I think it's, you know, for me, the counseling, having considered all those things, I'm like, okay, I need to go to this place that's safe, that I don't need to wear any mask or consider anybody else's feelings. I can totally, you know. I mean, the first few sessions, all I did was cry, you know, and then I kind of got to a place where I could actually have a coherent conversation.
Yeah.
And let a lot of the pain and stuff go, and, you know, put me in a good place.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good to hear. And I think, you know, obviously, given everything we've been through in the last year of our lives in terms of the lockdown and COVID-19, unfortunately, there is so many more people now that are going to be grieving a loved one of some form, or even, you know, somebody, you know, that I think we've all been in a situation where we've been touched at some point by people that we know with COVID-19. And unfortunately, there is a lot of people now that are going through or just starting their grieving journey for those people that they've lost. And, you know, I think what would you say would be your, as like you say, every journey is unique, every person is unique, but, you know, what advice would you give to people out there that are just, you know, unfortunately going through this pandemic and losing people that they love?
I think one of the main things is embrace everything that you feel. It's frightening, it's uncomfortable, it knocks the wind out of you. But one of the reasons why I chose to do that was I didn't want to be lulled into this false sense of security, thinking, oh, I'm all right now. And then 6 months later, bam. Because one thing with grief, it's not a respectable thing. It will show up when it likes, how it likes, and manifest itself when it wants to. So you could be having a great day and you can hear a song. I mean, I remember going somewhere with a friend and we'd gone to, you know, dressed up, I put my makeup on, I was looking decent, I was feeling great. Lost some weight because I got a personal trainer, everything. I was really getting myself together. And I heard a song. That was it. You had to leave.
Yeah.
Good 2 weeks, I was in the real belly of depression. But I allowed myself to go through that. Not to say, no, I'm fine, no, I will not be all right. Let me work through that process. So that next time when it hits, I can be proactive in managing how I am going to respond. So that I am in control of the grief and the grief is not in control of me. So it's just very important that people embrace what they're feeling and have somebody where they are able to be completely themselves and not having to over-explain. I had a friend that came to me and literally just held my hand for hours. She said, all she asked was, do you need anything? And didn't say a word. And we should stop thinking that we have to come up with clever things to say, because there's nothing that anybody could ever say that makes it feel better. Nothing.
And I think, and I'm sure this is a global issue everywhere. When you are with somebody who's lost someone, you try and think of the right words, and you try and say something, like you say, a bit clever, or just something comforting. And some people don't even say anything at all. And sometimes that's the right thing, just to be present and hold your hand and say that's okay.
Or I'm here. What do you need? One of the things I found so disempowering was people assuming that they knew what I needed. I hated that so much. Oh, you're never going to be the same again. How do you know?
Yeah.
Used to say, oh, you're never going to want to be with anyone else because you and your husband. How do you know? Apart from the fact that it's not your business.
Yeah.
How do you know? Oh, it must be Christmas. You must be really sad. Well, I wasn't till you opened your mouth. I'm having a good day.
Yeah.
But it's a thing where everyone seems to think, I know how you're feeling. I know what you're going through. No, you don't. I hate it. I still hate that.
Yeah. And I think, with most people, I think it is obviously always done with good intentions, isn't it? And I think we've got, that British stiff upper lip of, okay, you'll be all right, soldier on, you'll be fine, and let's get you through this, and let's pretend it's not happening. And I think, we as a society, we just need to get better at sharing how we feel. And I think in particular, when it comes to, I'm thinking about Step Up Youth, as a generation of younger people coming up through the world, you're going to experience this loss at some point. Fingers crossed it would not be for a long time, but at some point in your life, you're going to experience loss and grief. And I think we are a typical younger generation now that I've certainly witnessed and worked with, that don't have a meaningful conversation, because we've always got our smartphones in our hands. And I think, how we share our emotions, our feelings, and our get into deep conversation can really have a major impact on people's lives. So, the encouragement, I think, to talk to people, talk to your friends or talk to your family, I think, there's nothing better. Don't WhatsApp or TikTok them. Sit and have a good conversation with them, because you can learn a lot and you can share a lot, in terms of that. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then I suppose the sort of other thing I was going to cover with you, Dilys, is how I know you grew up in London, but I'd say you still have family, and your husband's family in Africa. Did you find the process very different from Britain to Africa? Would you have found it more difficult to be in Africa, or easier, given everything you've gone through with your family?
I think it would have been more difficult being in Africa, because it would have been different, levels of expectation. But like I said, if I would have had to have hired, armed guards, then I would have done it. There was no location that I would have allowed myself to have been bullied. I would have just stepped up my game. And I said, if I was in Africa, then I would have hired soldiers, as you do, and I would have had armed escorts, and that's what I would have done. I just don't do victim for anybody. What I was going through was just so bad that, I think in Africa, people tend to conform a lot more. I'm not a conformist, never have been, never will be. So for me, location was inconsequential.
Yeah.
It just, no. I can't put it any other way.
No, that's great. No, I was really curious when I heard about your book and your presentation, as to how, as I say, sort of my perception very much is, we're British, let's crack on, and let's, we do everything, very formally, and then we just move on, we don't talk about it again, and it's kind of just gets all brushed under the carpet.
African communities is no different. It's the one thing that I did realize, where grief is concerned, we all behave the same. Yeah. We just have varying degrees of certain behaviors. The only difference with widowhood is that, like I said, in the African community, oh, you must have killed your husband. That kind of flippant, foolish nonsense, But in terms of being rejected by family, people just being interested in money, everybody grappling for what they can get, from the will, it's no different.
It's no different. Yeah, whether you're in Brazil, Australia, anywhere in between, exactly the same. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, obviously, you're a couple of years on now since you lost Eddie. I mean, has the relationships got better? Or have they steadied out with family, or are they? Did you find that it kind of
my in-laws, my former in-laws?
Yeah.
Some of them have just naturally just fallen by the wayside. Others have, kept in contact. There were a couple that, was interesting, how they've kind of fallen by the wayside, but I'm not bothered at all. I'm so, happy now to move forward with my life. And I'm in a good place, and I'm on a good journey. And, I just wish everybody the best. I'm just living my life now.
Absolutely. And you know, from another perspective, I do, my day job is a lot of work. I do a lot of work with corporate organizations from all over the globe. We work with managers and leaders everywhere, and it's something that I'm very interested in, is supporting people in the workplace, because we all have jobs. And we've all gone through so much, as I say, especially in the last year. But even when it comes down to the role of like a manager or a leader, most people are severely uncomfortable with having conversations, whether it's around mental, physical health, well-being. And the bereavement and grief is something that, if somebody loses somebody in your team, or you've got to manage that process from an organization perspective, and that team member, it's not your family, it's not your friends, quite often it's a colleague. And how do people begin to help that person in the process from a workplace perspective? Because I think it's quite important that, everyone would return to work at some point, and they're going to take this emotion into their workplace. Of course they are, because you don't switch it off on a 9 to 5. So, is there any advice you could give people out there that are trying to support colleagues through this?
To be honest with you, they shouldn't be at work if they don't want to be.
Yeah.
It's bottom line. When I looked at the experience I had, I was in no fit state. I think when I used to work in local authorities, I think you have 5 days of bereavement leave. What nonsense is that? 5 days?
5 days. Yeah.
It's like, seriously? So for one, you need to ask that grieving person, what do you need? To have made me go into an office to function? How? I couldn't even sleep. So it's just bizarre. To be honest with you, I cannot even get my words out, because they shouldn't even be there. Grief does a lot of things to you mentally. It affects your mental health profoundly. The trauma, and sometimes the post-traumatic stress, which is something that I suffered with, because you don't, especially if it's a sudden death, you didn't see it coming. 1 minute the person's there, the next minute they're not. It has such a profound impact on your mental health, especially if you're a parent. Because no matter how well you're doing, once you look at your kids, you're finished. And it took me a long time not to be affected by my daughter's grief. The moment she cries for that one thing I cannot give her, I'm done for. Sometimes she's fine. She had a little cry, 5 minutes. That's me out of action for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So being in that workplace where, if it's a high-powered role, or you yourself are a manager and you're responsible for people, and you're having to look at this world that's moving forward, that has got no space for the person that you've lost, that is a glaring missing piece of your puzzle, and everybody else is just living their life, that in itself is a trigger. So, I mean, I think that they should have properly trained people. It's more than just, so how are you feeling today? Well, if there's anything we can do to help, do let us know. It's nonsense. It is not helpful one bit. No. It's a tick box. The one thing I would tell you about people who are grieving, we know when what you're asking is genuine. Yeah. We know. So when you come with your phrases, and we feel it, and it hurts. Yeah. It really, really, really hurts. Because what you do is you make a nonsense of such a profoundly harrowing experience that we are having to live through, and we can't escape. Yeah. So for leaders, I would say, if you really want to support people that are grieving, especially now that this is going on, get professionals that have walked that walk at the very least. and have them really, I mean, like my daughter's school has been phenomenal. Every so often she finds herself in pastoral care. There's times where she can't go to her lesson and she'll sit in pastoral care for a whole afternoon. No judgment, nothing like, okay, right, now that you've had this many days off, you know, we're taking you through a disciplinary procedure, which is what you will get at work.
Yeah.
So you have that of, oh my God, I need to work, I need the money. But
need to show up, yeah.
If you're a cell or a body in the office, then by all means, let's continue to support people in the workplace in that way. But if you want somebody that can come back to life, then they have to be really honest about how much they are willing to invest in those people in the workplace. But if it's just a tick box, then just carry on doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And I suppose finally, Dilys, I know we're taking up quite a lot of your time here. And I think finally for me, it's just thinking about what.
I'm worried about how dark it is in here now and whether I should go and switch the light on.
Oh, I was going to say, well, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of really out of questions, but it's up to you if you want us to do that.
Let me just turn my camera off so you don't have the displeasure of having to look at my butt. 1 second. Yeah, that's better.
Fabulous. And I think, you know, for me, it's just, I know this is, again, an impossible question probably to ask you as a final question, but, you know, given we're in a lockdown and we're not even allowed to leave our houses, but what does the next sort of 12 months, 18 months hold for you, Dilys? Have you got any plans about where you're moving to next and what the future holds?
Well, when I was in lockdown, because I was in Ghana in March, so I had an interview in Lagos. I flew to Nigeria, had an interview there for my book. And then I had this big launch that was planned in March, and then lockdown happened, so I couldn't have the launch. But what I did do was I started a series on Facebook called Life, Laughter and Lockdown, which I did for about 2-3 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks every day. So it was just at 15-minute snippets. And then I started my show called Speak with Dilys, where I talk about very, you know, real life stuff, which I do on a Sunday at 8 p.m. And it's back now. It's the second series, but we're back now, which is on Facebook. So if anybody wants to check that out, 8 p.m., they can find me there on a Sunday evening, London time. So that's what's taking up my time at the moment. I am looking to do something for International Women's Day as well, and doing some online courses. So I'm always busy, and I'm studying as well. I'm back at uni studying social science and psychology. Okay. So I'm never idle.
Excellent. Well, for anybody who wants any more information, we'll put this up on the podcast, but please do check out Dilys's Facebook sessions and also on Amazon, her books.
What the book looks like, not this widow.
Fantastic. Look at that. And let's share and rejoice together and share these experiences as much as we can. And also perhaps we could invite you back for a second episode, Dilys, to talk about your first book and in terms of helping women to identify those very sort of powerful insights that you've shared for you know, male and female, obviously, for domestic physical and mental abuse. And I think that's a very important subject again that we could maybe cover in a second episode if you'd be willing to come back and share that with us.
Back, definitely.
Lovely. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time, for our first podcast guest. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we look forward to sharing some more with you soon.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.